Bobby Kennedy was looking for new targets. The Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations had held 29 days of hearings about fraud in the procurement of military uniforms. On July 10, 1956, RFK and the staff issued a second report about mobbed-up companies that had pushed up the costs of Navy caps, Army jackets, and the like. But beyond that, he had run out of revelations. That summer, Clark Mollenhoff, Washington bureau chief for the Des Moines Register and the Minneapolis Star-Tribune, promoted a target to Kennedy: Detroit Teamsters boss Jimmy Hoffa. For the past 3 years, in a sustained crusade of muckraking, Mollenhoff had reported one expose after the other about Hoffa and the Teamsters. Kennedy wasn't familiar with Hoffa, so Mollenhoff provided a lengthy explanation and gave him copies of his news articles. Mollenhoff had been after Hoffa since 1953, when the reporter was assigned to look into complaints from a local business about brutal tactics by Teamsters officials in Minneapolis. Mollenhoff, a lawyer and member of the newspaper guild, was sympathetic to unionism. He expected to find that the complaints were little more than grousing by a company trying to save a buck by driving out its union. Instead, what he found shocked him. Hoffa employed hoodlums as union stewards, men who thought nothing of threatening or beating members who wanted a say in how their locals were operated. Furthermore, a car-hauling company was funneling money to Hoffa in exchange for a sweetheart deal that over the years saved it hundreds of thousands of dollars. Mollenhoff outlined one such arrangement in an article that began, "The wife of James R. Jimmy Hoffa was on the payroll of the rackets-ridden jukebox local of the Detroit Teamsters Union at $100 a week, but she never went near the office." Few reporters investigated the nation's 1.4 million member International Brotherhood of Teamsters. For one, Teamsters drivers delivered newspapers in most cities, and in general, newspapers' owners and editors didn't go out of their way to antagonize their distributors. In addition, newspapers were susceptible to union pressure. Unlike automobiles or timber or other products, newspapers were perishable, especially in cities with competing dailies. Bundles of undelivered newspapers, delayed by trumped-up work stoppages, ended up in trash bins. Old news is a pejorative term for a reason. Not surprisingly, Mollenhoff's exposés had little impact on Hoffa and almost none in the nation's capital. When Hoffa next ran across Mollenhoff at the Mayflower Hotel in Washington, Hoffa greeted him with a smirk. Looking up at the 6'4", 250-pound reporter, the stumpy labor boss said, "Hiya, poison pen." Then Hoffa tried an approach that had worked successfully with other reporters. "Now look at here, Clark. They don't pay newspaper reporters enough for you to be giving me the bad time that you've been giving me." Hoffa looked him in the eye and then coolly said, "Everybody has his price. What's yours?" An unnerved Mollenhoff decided to treat the offer as a joke. "You don't have enough money, Jimmy," he replied. Kennedy wasn't sold on Mollenhoff's idea, even after reading the reporter's hard-hitting stories. RFK knew little about how unions worked and less about how business owners and union officials colluded. Kennedy had grown up tended by nannies, schooled in private academies, and exposed to powerful businessmen and politicians through his father's connections. Joe Kennedy was the son of a Boston saloon keeper who also served as a ward boss in Boston. Joe went to Harvard, then picked banking as a career, a waspish domain far from his Irish Catholic roots. He became a successful trader on Wall Street in the 1920s, where he was known as an unsentimental, brusque operator who famously said, "Only a fool holds out for the top dollar." That philosophy and holdings from his bank, Columbia Trust, helped shelter him from the 1929 stock market crash. He came out with tens of millions of dollars of his wealth intact and invested in liquor, movie studios, and commercial real estate. A tycoon at a relatively young age, Joe Kennedy became bored with business and never talked about it with his children. Listening to them talk about money, said Charles Spaulding, a close friend of the Kennedy brothers, was like listening to nuns talking about sex. Joe Kennedy's informal curriculum at the family dinner table